Welcome back to the application of mental processes. I'm Lance Dixon, and I'm going to be walking you through the first topic of this course, which is the human mind. Now, before we get started, I hope you had the opportunity to take a look at the topic learning objectives as we discussed in the introduction to the overall course. If you haven't, that's not going to be a problem because we're going to go over those again. But generally, for the future topics, please try and take a look at the topic learning objectives. This is your way of holding us accountable for the information that we're about to share with you. Thanks again and have fun with the next topic. The human mind. The learning objectives for the human mind are as follows. We're going to learn about the three functions of the mind. We're going to discuss how these functions of the mind influence our individual behaviors. And last, we're going to discuss the types of thinking. Now, there are three functions to the mind. We think, we feel, and we want. Now, these three functions work hand in hand with one another, and together they will influence our behaviors. But let's speak about the first function, which is thinking. Okay, thinking. We are going to define exactly what thinking is. But before we get into that definition, let's talk about what occurs in the mind as a result of our thinking. One of the things we do is we judge or we make judgments. We form opinions based on prior knowledge, information, or input that we may have received. And we make decisions or form opinions about how we believe things ought to be. We make those judgments. Another thing we do is we analyze. When we analyze, we take the whole and we break it up into the individual parts and kind of look at how those parts work. Let me give you an example. Automobile. Automobile has a variety of parts. We got the engine, we got the carburetor, we got the starter, it got the computer system, and so many other pieces that goes into the overall process of the whole automobile. So we look at those individual parts and kind of get an understanding of how they work. And hopefully by doing that, we'll get a better understanding of how the automobile works as a whole, which is synthesizing. We synthesize, which is the exact opposite. Once we get these parts, we put them together to form that whole, to get that big picture. We look at the individual parts and then we put it together to get the big picture of how something is supposed to work. We also compare. We compare one situation to another and look at the differences. This is better than that. That is not as good as this. All of these are things that occur as a result of our thinking. So let's define thinking. The action of using one's mind to produce a thought. Very simple. That's exactly what we're doing. We are producing thoughts, or let's change the word producing to creating, producing or creating thought. So what exactly is a thought? A thought is an intellectual product or organized views and or principles of a period, place, group, or individual. Wow. Now that is a mouthful. That definition of a thought seems to be a little complicated. So let's kind of break it down and explain it so that it'll be a little easier to digest so we can have a complete understanding of exactly what a thought is, because this is what our thinking produces. So let's figure this thing out. First, understand our thinking creates the thoughts. Thoughts are a result of our thinking. Thoughts are one, an intellectual product of the mind. Your mind created that product. That's a thought. It can also be an organized view or viewpoint. Once again, it was created by the mind. Or principles that we believe or that we create. All of this is created by the mind or by our thinking process. It can be one or a combination of all three. And they're always going to be concerning or pertaining to periods, such as a period of time, maybe the Renaissance period, maybe the 1970s, 80s, whatever period of time. Thoughts are going to be concerning that, is places, groups, or individuals. To sum it all up, thinking is how we make sense of what is happening in our minds. Now, first function of the mind, thinking. Let's go to the next function of the mind, which is feelings. Now, feelings, they have an emotional component attached to them. There's always some type of emotional state attached to how we feel. We can feel happy. We can feel sad. We can be calm. We can be angry. We can be excited. Or we can be anxious. All of these things are results of how we feel. So let's define it. An emotional state based on input received from any of the five senses. This is seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting. Or a belief based on some prior thought. Let's give you an example of that last part, a belief based on some prior thought. Okay, you see over there in the corner, we got this little scary house. Now, let's say we went to a scary movie, and now, based on what we saw in the movie, we now believe that our house is haunted. What brought us to this belief? Well, we saw certain things in the movie. We probably compared it to certain things that we already understood about our house. And now we attach that emotional state and we feel that the house is haunted. Feelings are going to be a result of our thinking. Last one is wanting. Our personal desires that we wish to pursue. This is what we want. This is a function of the mind. Desires, a strong factor in motivating behavior. It's not the only thing to motivate the behavior, but it's a very strong factor that is associated with motivating our behaviors. Give you an example. Baby wants a bottle of milk or a bottle and cries until he is given the bottle. Baby's only way of communicate is crying. Baby feels this uncomfortable feeling that you don't know what it is, but it's not feeling well in his stomach, growling, whatever. He's hungry. So because of this feeling, he cries. Now the behavior of the feeling or his feeling is to motivate the crying. But what the sound of the crying does, it motivates the parent to get the bottle, give it to the baby, the baby drinks the bottle, and he is no longer crying because his need has been met. His desire has been fulfilled. Let me give you an example of how this can work. I think I am fat. All of my thoughts have been generated to make me think that I am fat. Now, based on this thinking, I'm feeling bad because I am fat. I just don't feel good about my state of being. And now I want to be skinny. I do not want to be fat anymore. So what do? I go on a diet to lose weight and not be fat. So thinking, feeling, and wanting, all of this leads to the change in my behavior. It motivated the change of my behavior so that I would go on a diet and not be fat. To sum all this up, we can look at this slide and it says your thinking controls your emotions, your desire, and your decisions. And all of this influence the way we act or our behavior. Finally, we will discuss two types of thinking. First type is what we call egocentric thinking. This is our own selfish outlook on what we think. It strives to gain its selfish interests. It strives to validate its current way of thinking. One way to look at this is the following statements. It's true because I believe it is true. It is true because I want it to be true. It's true because it is in my selfish interest to believe that it is true. It's all about me, my way or the highway, egocentric thinking. The next is rational thinking. This is where we consider all aspects and sides of what we are thinking about. We consider the right needs of others as we're thinking, and we strive to see things as they really are. We want the truth, not necessarily because it helps us, but because it is, in fact, the truth. Let me give you an example. And I'm going to use that automobile again. I want to buy a new car. I'm an egocentric thinker. I want a Jaguar. I don't care how much the car costs. I want a Jaguar. It doesn't matter if I can afford it. I want a Jaguar. It's all about what I want and how I am going to validate what I want. I am thinking egocentrically. Now, as a rational thinker, I still want a Jaguar, but I have to think about one, how much does the car cost? Two, can I afford to purchase this vehicle? Three, if I do purchase this vehicle, what will I have to sacrifice and how will it affect my lifestyle? I'm looking at everything concerning the purchase in a rational way so that I can make the best decision. Now, we both have both forms of egocentric thinking as well as rational thinking. There's no way to eliminate one or the other, but we have to be aware that they do exist, because out of that awareness, we can kind of direct the way we think, which leads to this last question. Do you control your thinking, or does your thinking control you? What does that mean? Well, sometimes people are not in control of their thoughts. Every thought that comes to mind, they actually give attention to it. Sometimes when we think, we daydream and lose track of time and purpose and a bunch of other things because we're lost in those thoughts. So what's the answer to that? Well, here's some ways that you can have more of a command on your thinking. First, we want to identify and recognize your thoughts. When I say identify and recognize your thoughts, when a new thought comes to mind, identify it. Is it a thought? Is it a desire? Is it emotion? Why is that thought there? Your mind created that thought. What was the purpose behind the creation of that thought? Focus on those new thoughts. Don't daydream. Try to eliminate daydream. When we have thoughts, give attention to what they are. And then decide what thoughts you will place your focus on. Sometimes you may have thoughts that you need to reject because they're not necessarily in your best interest. Just because you have a thought, you do not have to think about it, or you do not have to place focus on it. All three of these things will give you more of a command on your thinking, give you more control of your thoughts. All right, that's basically all the information we have for this topic. The next thing you'll see is a quick review quiz. Take the quiz, see how you do. If you do well, let's move on to the next topic. If you have some areas that you wasn't quite sure of, then review the topic again. You'll get it.